The lockdown has many of us dreaming about wide open spaces, and someone who works in one of the widest spaces you can imagine, the deep blue sea, is National Geographic Shark expert Ryan Johnson. Now, his latest documentary work is about to take the world by storm. He's captured never-seen-before footage of a great white shark attacking a humpback whale. To tell us more about that and how lockdown has affected his work as a marine biologist, we're joined by Ryan now via Skype from Mossel Bay. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Over the last few weeks, we've also been speaking to people in various fields about how lockdown has affected their work. I read a few weeks ago, a few weeks into lockdown, how scientists in various fields are saying that because the world just quieted down because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic, it's made it almost easier for them to listen to nature more closely. And some of them were people in your field saying that because the oceans became silent, they were able to listen even to even deeper parts of the ocean. Has that been your experience?
No, unfortunately not. I would love to be getting out to sea, but unfortunately a lot of our funding comes from international interns and students who come across and basically pay for us to get out to sea. And with all the restrictions on movements, we haven't been able to get to sea for either research or tourism purposes for a few months now.
Is there the hope, however, that the ocean has been given a little bit more space to breathe over the last few months?
Oh, you know, I'm very excited to get back out there and see that, because I believe that will be the case. We know netting, we know fishing, we know the exploration of the oil industry all has massive impacts on marine life. So I suspect when we get back out there, we will be pleasantly surprised with what we do find.
How exciting that must be. Let's talk a bit about your latest piece of work that really is expecting to take people by storm. Now we cannot show that footage. It's being kept under wraps by National Geographic, obviously. Shark versus whale is what it's being called. Talk to us about the significance of this footage that you were able to film about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago so far. We covered here at ENCA the so-called disappearance of great whites from the False Bay area. One of the reasons that were given by scientists at the time was because of whales moving in on their space, and the sharks just deciding, well, that's it, we're leaving for safer pastures. Talk to us about this footage and why it's so significant.
Well, you know, I did turn that whole story on its end, really. You know, there's different types of whale. Obviously, an orca is a very big predator, the biggest predator on the planet, and that's one kettle of fish. But what essentially happened was I got a call from the National Sea Rescue Institute that there was a distressed or dead whale out at sea, and it was going right through Mossel Bay, which is a great white shark hotspot. So I decided the best approach to document this would be to get the drone up and film it from the drone. And as soon as I got the drone up, I realized this whale was, in fact, living. It was weakened, it had been tangled by long lines, but it was alive. It was able to defend itself. And a few minutes later, a shark that I knew called Helen, 4-meter great white, turned up, and over the next 50 minutes, I was able to essentially document a very coordinated and a very strategic attack by the shark on this whale, which was, you know, 9-10 times her weight, to the end result that she managed to drown the whale. It sank down to the bottom of the ocean, and then I assume she went down to feed on.
Now, you've been studying great whites for a very long time, and even you were astounded by what you saw. You had tagged Helen, this great white, a few years earlier. What did this tell you about how she had evolved?
Well, you know, like a lot of people, my mind was very much in great white sharks hunting these seals in this huge high-speed ambush-style attack strategy that we see on TV and so forth. So when you see this predator take on something that's so out of its ballpark, it really made me reassess entirely the hunting ability of these great whites. The biggest question I had was, you know, particularly when I watched her and she was so strategic and smart about it, was, has she done this before? has she been able to kill these whales and hunt these whales, and we just haven't seen it as humans? And that's when we got National Geographic involved, and they came with a big bunch of funding to essentially allow us to follow the next humpback whale migration for pretty much an entire year, trying to understand this dynamic, trying to understand, are great white sharks real serious predators of humpback whales?
Is it too early to say whether this behavior you saw from the great white Helen was something that was something that she had developed as part of her own personality and a set of skills that she'd evolved with, or something that we would see in the evolution of all great whites going forward?
Honestly, I think it is probably too early to tell. Over all the research and the literature research and the background I did, I only found one other case where there was any evidence of sharks hunting humpback whales or big whales, and that was at the Sardine Run in East London. We looked for scar patterns on whales that showed past evidence of sharks hunting them, and we couldn't find any of that. I suspect, my gut tells me that it's a very rare occurrence, and it only really can occur when all these different factors come together, and that being you have a big whale that's vulnerable because it's either entangled or it's been hit by a boat or it's very malnutrition, has a lot of malnutrition associated with it, and that whale is passing through an area where great whites concentrate, and then in that population of great whites there just happens to be a very big, very confident great white that has that confidence to take on something like a whale.
Now, the movement of the great whites out of False Bay obviously received a lot of attention because it also had its own little economy around the appearance of great whites in the False Bay area. So a lot of talk about how their disappearance from False Bay has an economic impact as well. In your opinion, are we likely to see the absence of great whites in the False Bay area continue, or, like most things in nature, might things change again?
There's always a chance that it's going to change, but the reality is there's some orcas, and it was initially two, but it does seem now that there's more orcas that have learnt to attack and harass great white sharks. And what we've seen also in Hunts Bay at Dyer Island is, even as the sharks start moving back for a few months, the orcas will then come back again and harass them and cause them to disperse away. I think it's in all likelihood going to continue for a number of years, particularly while these orcas are around our waters. What it isn't, though, it isn't a population emergency for the great white sharks. I suspect it's more just a distribution change. Instead of the sharks having, that great place, Seal Island, False Bay, where they can just concentrate up, be excited, be happy, hunt seals all day long, now they've had to distribute off to other areas where it's a little bit safer for them, where they're not under quite so much threat, and, where the orcas probably can't find them quite so predictably.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's National Geographic Shark expert Ryan Johnson coming to us live there from Mossel Bay.